The life and death of Vibia Perpetua gives an amazing insight into the early development of Christian thought and practice. Her final days are recorded in the writings known as the Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas, where she gives a first-hand account of her final days from baptism to her death. Although these accounts contain only a fraction of her life, Christians have sought comfort over the past 1700 years through the stories of her struggles and triumphs. In this video, we will look at everything we know about Perpetua and outline her actions in her final days. With that being said, let us get started looking at Perpetua, the martyred mother. Vibia Perpetua was born in Carthage, Northern Africa, around 182 AD. She was born to a father who was a high-ranking official in the Roman military in North Africa. She had two brothers still living and one who had passed away from some sort of facial disease when he was 7 years old. Carthage at this time was in the midst of a thriving Christian community. Perpetua's records start with her on the path to becoming a Christian. How she became interested in the movement is not clear, but we do know that some in her family were already followers of Christ. One of the biggest unknowns surrounds her relationship with her husband. When her account begins, she has just given birth to a newborn baby. Throughout the entire record, he isn't mentioned once, which has led to much speculation over the years regarding why he is exempt from her story. Her father, however, would play a major part in her story. Her father did not share his daughter's faith and would continue to beg Perpetua to recant her faith. A bit of information is necessary to understand why Perpetua was put in the position she was. The Roman emperor at this time was Lucius Septimus Severus, who reigned from 193 to 211 AD. He had a distaste for Christians and Jews and made it illegal to convert to either group. Severus sought to expand his influence and began to push into northern Africa. At the same time, Hilarius became the Roman governor of Africa. In 203, Hilarius began to enforce this edict from Severus and made it illegal to convert to Christianity and Judaism. It just so happens at this exact moment, Perpetua and 5 of her fellow believers were doing this very thing in Carthage. In 203, Perpetua was part of the first group that were arrested while preparing for catechism. These 5 people are referred to as catechumens because they were in the process of being baptized into the Christian community. While gathered, Perpetua was arrested with 5 others named Revocatus, Felicitas, Saturnius, Secundulus, and Saturus. They were first sentenced to house arrest where they were all officially baptized. When Perpetua was arrested, her father immediately arrived and began to beg Perpetua to renounce her newfound faith. But she responded using a vase as a metaphor. She replied, paraphrasing, "Father, do you see this vessel? Can it be called by any other name than which it is?" He answered, "No. So can I call myself nothing other than that which I am, a Christian." This famous saying gives a glimpse into the mind of Perpetua and why she continued the way she did. A couple days after this, they were sent to prison where the conditions were described as hellish. We are told very soon after their arrival that 2 deacons, Tetrius and Pomponius, bribed the guards to get them into a better, quieter part of the prison. Perpetua says this was important because her infant boy was hungry and now she could feed him in more peace. At this point, the question of what would happen to this group was still up in the air. Perpetua's brother came to her and recommended she ask the Lord for a vision to clarify if they would be delivered or if this was to be the end for them. Making no exact promises, she agreed to ask and would report to him the next day. Upon asking, she was shown the first of 3 visions she would record in her writings. She explains she was shown a bronze ladder that reached up to heaven. The sides of the ladder were filled with swords, spears, and knives. At the bottom was a serpent lying in wait for those that didn't go up. She observed Saturus, who went up first, and ushered Perpetua to come up and to avoid the serpent. She proclaimed that it wouldn't hurt her in the name of Jesus, and as if it feared her, she stepped on its head and went up the ladder. Upon arriving at the top, she saw a magnificent garden with a man milking his sheep. Standing around in white were many thousands of people. The man welcomed Perpetua and offered her some curd from the milk, and as she ate it, they all stood around and said, "Amen." At the sound of the word, she awoke, still with the sweet taste in her mouth. She realized it would soon be the end, and they began to have no hope any longer in this world. Soon after this, they received word that they would be tried. While having dinner, they were suddenly whisked away to the forum. A little crowd showed up, and they took their place inside the box to be questioned. Each was asked individually, and each confessed their faith in Jesus. When it was Perpetua's time, her father pulled her down and began pleading for her to stop what she was doing. He was on his knees, crying and begging, telling her to think about his old age, her mother, and especially her baby. She felt sad seeing him this way, but only because she realized he couldn't accept what the rest of her family already accepted. Hilarianus also attempted to appeal to her when he said, "Spare your father's old head, spare the young child, offer a sacrifice for the well-being of the emperors." She, however, rejected this idea, and when he asked if she was a Christian, she replied simply, "Yes, I am a Christian." Her father, however, was still making a scene, and because of this, Hilarianus ordered her father outside and had his guards beat him down. He officially passed judgment on the whole group, condemning them to the wild animals. With this, the group headed back in good spirits, knowing they had done God's will. Once they were back, Perpetua asked Pomponius to retrieve her son from her father, but her father refused to give him back. Thankfully, he no longer needed to be suckled, and she had no pain in her breasts. A few days later, while praying as a group, she suddenly spoke aloud, "Dinocrates." He was the brother who got sick and died with an ulcer on his face, which was a, quote, "horrible experience for everyone." She felt urged to pray very hard for him, and that night was shown a vision. She saw Dinocrates coming out of a dark place where there were a lot of other people. He was filthy looking, thirsty, and very pale, with his face disfigured as it was when he died. There was a chasm between them until she prayed, and it was filled with water, but he couldn't get a drink and was in torment. She then woke up, realizing he was in torment, and she continued to pray every day for him until they were moved to the gladiator show in the arenas. After being moved, she had another vision. This time, where there had previously been darkness, was now bright with light. Instead of being disheveled, he was now happy, clean, and nicely dressed. Where once was a sore, now was just a scar. Now he had a golden cup and was able to drink from the water that never emptied. After this, she awoke and said she realized he had been released from his punishment. After being moved in preparation for the emperor's birth, she had her final vision. She had a vision of Pomponius, who came knocking at the prison gate as she was dreaming. Once she opened the gate, he requested she accompany him to the amphitheater, and when she arrived, she found a large crowd wild with excitement. In the opposite corner, a horrible-looking Egyptian came out, preparing to fight. Some men came to help Perpetua, and after her clothes were taken off, she realized she had become a man. Before the fight, a giant stood taller than the amphitheater, holding a green branch with golden apples. He said if the Egyptian conquers the woman, he can kill her, but she'll get the branch if she conquers him. After a brief scuffle, she kicked him to the ground and smashed his head in. The crowd started cheering, and the giant told Perpetua, quote, "Peace be with you, my child," and got the branch. After this, she awoke and commented that she realized the focus was not on fighting the beasts, but instead, in the dream, she had fought against the devil and won. At this, she prepares for the next day and ends her personal accounts of her final days. The narrator takes over the accounts for the rest of the writings. And a side note to point out here is the state that Felicitas was going through as the day of the fight came. Felicitas has been connected with Perpetua throughout Christian history, since they both shared a deep connection through their own motherhood. But Felicitas began to fear that since she was only 8 months pregnant, she would have to be executed later apart from the group. They were all saddened since they thought they would have to leave her. But after they prayed, 2 days before the contest, the birthing pains came upon Felicitas. She gave birth to a baby girl, and she arranged for one of her sisters to bring up the daughter as her own. This made it possible for the whole group to go to the Conquest together. They had their last meal, normally called the free banquet, but celebrated it as a love feast. As we move into the day of Conquest, Perpetua and the group made their way to the amphitheater joyfully as if they were marching into heaven. They were all also glad Felicitas was able to join them for the final conquest. Although Felicitas was able to join the group, Secundulus had already passed away previously in prison. As they entered, the crowds became enraged and began calling for their deaths. First, the men were taken and released to the animals, including a bear, a leopard, and a wild boar. Saturnius and Revocatus were exposed to these wild beasts and eventually were torn apart from a bear. Satyrus detested the thought of dying to a bear, wanting to be killed by a leopard. To his frustration, he was matched up with a boar that ended up killing its handler, yet it did not even approach him. He then was tied down, and as they opened the doors for the bear to attack, it would not come forth from its den. Because of this, Satyrus was brought back out of the arena to wait. After this, the women were brought out naked in large nets, but the crowd was horrified when they saw the young girl who was still fresh from childbirth the day before. They took the women back and clothed them in tunics and presented them again. This time, a heifer charged at Perpetua, tossing her down on the ground, ripping part of her tunic. She stood quickly, fixing her hair and her tunic. She then went to help Felicitas up, who had also been crushed to the ground. At this, the group had survived the initial wave and was taken to the back as they put the beasts away. The remaining individuals were lined up in the middle of the arena in view of everyone. The soldiers began to strike everyone down with their swords. When it was Perpetua's turn, she was struck with the sword on the bone and began to tremble. While doing so, she took the hand of the gladiator and guided it to her throat. It was as if she would not meet death until she was willing to surrender herself completely. Perpetua's life was ended with one last strike, and her place as a martyr was cemented in Christian history. It can hardly be understated to say how much of an impact the writings of an early female Christian martyr have had on Christian history. Even though we are only privy to a short section of Perpetua's life, the fact that her writings have been so well preserved has given many insights into the life of an early Christian. Her story has captivated people in many ways. Recently, there have been many various attempts to create a fictional backstory to her life. But it isn't just of recent years her life has been of interest. Even Augustine preached sermons about her life. Her visions show insight into possible theological development and hint toward later developments that would take place in the medieval period. In recent years, there has been one group that has sought to recapture the story of Perpetua as an inspirational figure. The LGBTQ community has adapted Perpetua as the patron saint of same-sex couples, pointing out several concepts that seem to question her sexuality and tie closely with the movement today. Looking at her life, it is clear that she continues to impact the faith of Christians throughout the world today. People of all stages of faith and study can draw unique insights from her work. From her vision about praying for the dead, her relationship with her child, the interesting vision of her becoming a man, and her passion for fellow Christians are just some examples of why Perpetua's writings are still studied today. Whether you are embarking along a historical critical examination of her writings, or whether you're looking to her life for encouragement to stay true to who you are, you will find an amazing woman and a fantastic story that has impacted people for nearly 1,700 years. But with that being said, that's all for now, and I'll see you next video for another informative and accessible introduction.